He walked into that courtroom like a man who had nothing left to fear. David Woolley didn't flinch, not once. His steps were steady, his eyes fixed. Meanwhile, Kody sat stiff in his seat, arms crossed, jaw tight, refusing to look anywhere near Christine. And yet, it was her presence that filled the room the most. Calm on the outside, but you could see the storm sitting just behind her eyes. Everyone could. The silence? It was louder than any word spoken. This wasn't just a courtroom hearing. This was a reckoning. Years of pain, bottled lies, and buried truths about to explode through one man's own recordings. Kody had always carried himself like the man in charge, the one no one could challenge, the husband of 4, the father of 18. But what happened next left even the most loyal of his supporters holding their breath. Because when David reached into his folder and pulled out that tiny black flash drive, nobody expected what was coming. Not even Kody. You'd think after broadcasting your family for over a decade, you'd know what to watch out for. But here's the thing. When a man talks as much as Kody does, eventually those words come back. And this time, they came back loud. You have to ask yourself, how does someone go from being the family's foundation to the source of its deepest fractures? Christine didn't say a word, but her posture, the way she leaned in, said everything. This wasn't just a moment of legal drama. It was personal. Every woman in that room had lived through years of emotional contradictions, being told one thing in private, only to see Kody speak the opposite publicly. And now? Now it was time to hear what he really thought when the cameras weren't rolling. You could feel it in the air. People shifted in their seats. The judge raised an eyebrow. Robyn looked like she hadn't slept. She gripped the edge of her blazer just a bit tighter. Janelle blinked slowly, processing it all like every fiber of her piece was being tested. Meri, she sat apart. Like always. But even she knew that this was the moment things stopped pretending to be okay. But let's pause right here for a second. If you were in that room, watching a man's years of manipulation unravel by his own voice, what would you be thinking? The moment that tiny speaker clicked on, everything shifted. You could see the blood drain from Kody's face. The recording began, not with shouting or chaos, but with his voice. Calm, controlled, unforgiving. Talking about loyalty, control, wives who needed to know their place. Words that he never thought would resurface now echoed off those cold walls, bouncing right back to him. Nobody said a thing, no interruptions, no excuses, just silence. Even the courtroom clerk looked up from her papers. Christine slowly turned her gaze from the speaker to the man she once loved. There was no fury. Not yet. Just that heartbreaking recognition in her face. Like something sacred had finally died, and now it couldn't be buried fast enough. And still, David stood firm, quiet, focused. Because this was only the beginning. That recording was just one of several. A signal flare. He hadn't even pressed play on the ones that held the real destruction. The wives may have left Kody one by one. But today, they would all hear the same thing for the first time. They'd hear what he said when he thought no one could hear him. When the camera crews were gone. When loyalty wasn't a performance but a demand. And that simple truth was about to destroy everything else. Because the courtroom wasn't just listening to his voice, it was finally hearing the man beneath it. Reaching this point didn't happen overnight. The courtroom may have been the final collision, but cracks have been forming for years, deep, raw, and impossible to ignore. Christine's decision to leave wasn't made out of anger, and anyone who truly watched this family unfold week after week knows that. It was pain. Layered, unspoken, years in the making kind of pain. The kind that builds when your voice no longer matters, and your presence becomes optional. People saw it coming, we all did. But maybe what we didn't see was just how deep the disconnection went. Christine had spent decades trying to feel chosen in a relationship that kept her in the shadows. It wasn't just about sharing a man, it was about being slowly erased while pretending to be valued. And when she finally said, "I'm done," it wasn't explosive. It was freeing, quiet but permanent. When a woman like Christine walks out, it's not because she's giving up. It's because she's done begging for bare minimum love from someone who keeps handing it to someone else. And that someone else was Robyn. You could feel the shift the moment she joined the family. The vibe changed. The wives started noticing it. The dynamic cracked fast and hard. Christine wasn't imagining the favoritism. Janelle saw it too. Meri felt it more than she ever admitted. Kody didn't even try to hide it anymore. Suddenly, everything revolved around pleasing Robyn. And that divide isolated every other woman in ways Kody refused to see, or maybe didn't want to acknowledge. It wasn't jealousy, it was erasure. And for Janelle, the turning point was subtle but firm. She had always been the calm one, the one who could roll with the chaos. But when Kody began demanding blind loyalty instead of emotional connection, that's when she began slipping further away. She wasn't dramatic about it. She didn't need to be. And maybe that scared him even more. Because Janelle doesn't explode. She detaches. And when she doesn't come back. Meri? Well, she had already been emotionally exiled long before anyone walked away. And Kody made that painfully clear. On camera. More than once. We all watched that heartbreaking hotel scene. We all heard him say he didn't consider himself married to her anymore. To say that on national television, with no tremor in his voice, after everything they'd been through, it silenced the room. And not in a good way. But then came David. And that's where everything changed. He wasn't flashy. He didn't come in trying to replace anyone. No loud declarations or grand hero moments. He showed up with consistency, presence, respect. And that's all Christine ever wanted. Look closer at her smile now. You'll see something that had been missing for years. Softness. She's no longer surviving. She's actually living. And maybe that's why Kody hates him so much. Not because he's a bad guy, but because he gave Christine everything she asked Kody for and made it look easy. Think about that for a second. Isn't that what stings the most? When someone treats the woman you disregarded like she's the center of the world? David didn't come to destroy a family. That family was already splintered. He came to protect what was left of Christine's sense of self after years of being second, third, and sometimes last. This isn't about vengeance. This is about visibility. That courtroom wasn't just about who said what. It was about who showed up and who didn't. David was there, steady and prepared. Kody showed up empty-handed, relying on the same indignation and tired defenses he's used for years. But this time, it wasn't working, because the women in that room finally understood their worth. And nothing he said could gaslight them out of it. There's something deeply empowering about watching a group of women realize they weren't the problem. That the silence they carried on their shoulders this whole time wasn't theirs to carry. And somehow, through all of it, Robyn still believed she was the victim. But what happens when your version of the truth stops lining up with literal evidence? Because the next recording makes the last one sound polite. And it's about to change everything. Nobody in that courtroom was ready to hear what Kody said when he thought no one was listening. But that didn't stop David from pressing play. The tiny speaker in front of the judge lit up, and then Kody's voice filled the room. Not the polished, defensive version that the world saw on camera, but something raw, unguarded, and unmistakably cruel. The timing, the delivery, the tone, they were all real. No denying, no spinning, no blaming anyone else. "I'm done bending over backwards for ungrateful women," his voice sneered from the speaker. "They don't want a marriage. They want control. You don't see Robyn acting like that." The courtroom went dead quiet. Not a single whisper, not even a cough. Janelle's head dropped for a second, blinking like her brain was scrambling to place when he could have said that. Christine sat completely still, her fingers frozen around the edge of the bench. And Robyn, her eyes darted down, but her face didn't change. Like she already knew exactly what was about to play. This wasn't some old offhand remark. This was recent. Recent enough that every wife in that room realized. His view of them hadn't changed at all behind closed doors. If anything, it was worse. David didn't flinch. He stood calm, arms crossed in front of his chest, while the sound of Kody digging his own grave played for the entire family to hear. And Kody! He froze, jaw locked, lips parted like he wanted to speak, but his breath kept catching. It's one thing to be criticized. It's another to hear yourself speak with disgust about the very women you claim to protect. And then the recording continued. A few words that somehow hit harder than anything else. They think love is freedom. Love is loyalty. You earn it. You don't get to question me and still be called a wife. Christine's face didn't change. Not rage, not tears, just still, completely still. But in that frozen silence, something massive shifted. All the stories he'd spun, all the talking heads, all the moments where he painted himself as the misunderstood victim, suddenly didn't matter. Because now, Christine wasn't just remembering. She was hearing. And the whole world was hearing with her. Robyn didn't look anywhere. Not at the judge, not at David, definitely not at Kody. She sat perfectly upright, hands in her lap, quietly absorbing the moment with the same tight-lipped, always composed expression. But her eyes, they said everything. And the truth is, some eyes can't lie, even when the mouth doesn't move. Janelle opened her mouth to speak, then stopped herself. You could see it. This internal war of shock, validation, and heartbreak battling silently across her face. Because for years, she gave him grace, gave him space. Tried to make sense of things he said. But this confirmed everything she feared was true. And then the recording ended. A click and abrupt silence that rang louder than Kody's words. Nobody moved. All eyes turned to him. Still no apology. Still no attempt to explain. Just the stiff, erratic breathing of a man who finally realized that the walls weren't closing in. They were already shut. This wasn't spin anymore. This wasn't editing. This was a voice recorder and a courtroom. What is that supposed to prove? He muttered under his breath, eyes darting to Robyn for backup he wouldn't get. I was angry. Everyone says things they don't mean in the heat of the moment. The judge didn't blink. But David? He tilted his head just slightly and said, almost too calmly, there's more. And just like that, air left the room again. Janelle leaned back, shoulders stiff. Christine crossed one leg over the other, still silent but holding his stare. Even Meri, who hadn't said a word all day, looked sideways with a sharpness that made her presence suddenly known. Because if that first clip was a glimpse, the second was a full unraveling. It was longer. The language was harsher. And it didn't just target the wives, it rewrote every version of Kody's truth that he'd ever sold the world. And this time, no one would be able to unhear it. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Calm confidence has a way of cutting louder than shouting. And in that courtroom, the quietest voice suddenly held all the power. Kody, still reeling from hearing his own words minutes before, tried to put himself back together. He adjusted his shoulders, forced a smirk. Tried to bury that rising panic with the only thing he's always relied on, his pride. But David stepped forward slowly, holding the flash drive like it weighed 1,000 pounds. You know, he said evenly, it's one thing to disappoint a partner. It's another to humiliate them and blame them for walking away. Kody's eyelids twitched. He opened his mouth, closed it, then leaned forward as if he was ready to push back, but didn't. For once, the words weren't lining up. His gaze bounced between Christine, Robyn, and the judge. He wasn't used to being cornered in public without a script. That man who always knew how to turn the narrative around was fading. "You told the world that Christine blindsided you," David said, voice steady. "You cried on camera, said she disrespected the family, denied you ever pushed her away. But then we hear you say she had to earn your love. That being married to her was a battle." He paused, just long enough to let the message land. "You weren't trying to save that marriage. You were withholding yourself until she broke." Kody leaned back in his chair, lips pressed into a thin line, irritation flickering behind his eyes. That mask of confidence, cracking by the second. Think about this. When someone's image has been built on being the misunderstood husband, how do they survive when words like control and obedience start surfacing in their own voice? Janelle leaned slightly forward, arms still folded, but with a new intensity in her stare. It wasn't anger, it was exhaustion. The years of trying to hold the family together now looked as heavy on her face as the truth filling the room. "Context matters," Kody finally muttered, as if the words might protect him. The courtroom didn't budge. David kept his tone flat, unsympathetic. "Context," he said carefully. "You compared Christine to Robyn like she was defective. You made love conditional. Do you understand how dangerous that is for a woman to live under?" Robyn finally moved, for the first time since the clip. Her hand caught her breath, pressed slowly to her chest, as if she was trying to absorb some of the blow. But she didn't defend him, not this time. Maybe because even she couldn't twist this moment into something explainable. And that silence from Robyn? It pierced deeper than any words she could have said. Everyone in the courtroom watched Kody, waiting for something resembling remorse, an apology. Even fake ones sound better than nothing. But instead, that familiar righteousness crept back in. He straightened, focused on David. "What would you know about maintaining a plural marriage?" Kody snapped, voice brittle beneath the pressure. "You just walked in late and played the rescuer. You didn't build this family." David didn't blink. "And yet," he said with calm weight, "I'm not the one being confronted by 3 women looking at me like strangers." His words landed like stone, sharp, quiet, final. Christine finally turned her head, her eyes drifting to Kody, this time with something new in them. Not sadness, not frustration, clarity, the kind that comes when the illusion is finally gone. And here's where it shifts again. Because for the first time in years, the man who always had the last word was being made to listen. Not to cameras, not to fans, but to consequence. David never needed to shout. All he had to do was hold up the mirror. But the next recording doesn't need a mirror. It burns on its own. And no one, not even Robyn, will walk away unchanged. The silence didn't last. It couldn't. Not after everything they'd just heard. It sat in the center of the courtroom like a live wire, waiting for someone to touch it. And finally, it was Janelle who reached for it first. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look for drama. But when she stood up, slowly, carefully, you could feel the shift before she even said a word. Her voice, level but heavy, cut through the air like it had been waiting to exist for years. "You always told us we were one family," she said quietly, not even facing him yet. "But the way you spoke in that recording makes it clear there never really was a we in your version of this." Kody's eyes twitched, his mouth slightly open, like he was trying to decide whether to defend himself or stay quiet. But he didn't speak, and honestly, he didn't need to. The damage was already in the room. Every wife had lived with that version of him. Only now, it was undeniable, public. "I thought I was being patient by staying loyal, by giving space. I blame myself for not being easy enough," Janelle continued, her voice breaking just slightly at the edges. "All that time, I thought maybe if I worked harder, compromised more, we could fix the gaps. But the truth is, the love was always conditional. It just wasn't obvious until now." Christine's eyes went glassy. This wasn't news to her. She'd lived this reality for years. But hearing Janelle say it aloud, finally validating the unspoken pain they'd both carried, sent a jolt right through her. And then came Robyn. She didn't stand. Her voice was low, almost hesitant, but her tone sharpened quickly. Those were private moments, angry moments. That's not who he is all the time. You've all said heated things too. All eyes turned to her. But none of us, Janelle said gently, recorded each other secretly calling our wives ungrateful. We weren't sitting in corners comparing each other's loyalty levels like we were in some kind of emotional competition. Robyn flinched at those words, but her response came quick, shaky. He was venting. He was overwhelmed. You're acting like he's some monster when all he's ever tried to do was hold us together. Christine finally looked up, and in that glance, years of grief passed between them. No one made him compare us to you again and again, Robyn, her voice cracked. That wasn't a slip. It was a pattern, and we all lived under it. Robyn tried to blink it away, but her throat tightened. You don't know what it's like to be blamed for loving your husband. And you don't know what it's like, Janelle snapped, to compete with a woman your husband chose over and over again, even when we begged him to see the rest of us. It wasn't anger. It was sorrow with teeth. Kody looked smaller now. Not physically, but emotionally. For a man who once commanded rooms with his presence, he suddenly seemed stranded. Caught between wives who once built their lives around him, all now seeing clearly and speaking plainly. Still, one person hadn't yet stepped in. Meri. She hadn't moved since the recording, hands folded gently in her lap, her eyes tracing every word, every reaction, like she was watching someone else's story unfold. But as the three other women spoke, shaking, angry, wounded, her expression began to change. Subtle but undeniable. Less distant, less detached. Almost restless, Christine noticed. Janelle glanced her way. Even Robyn turned, unsure of what Meri still held back, because if Meri broke her silence next, the entire room would shift again. Her experience sat like a sealed envelope on the table, unspoken, unread, but heavier than any of them really understood. And she was about to open it. For a moment, it felt like the courtroom stopped breathing. All eyes slowly shifted to Meri, who still sat perfectly composed until she wasn't. Her fingers moved first, gently unlinking from each other. Then, without needing a cue, she stood up. No emotion in her face yet. No trembling lips or teary eyes. Just a calmness so unexpected, it quieted every whisper in the room. No one interrupted her. She looked directly ahead. Not at Kody, not at the judge, not even at Christine or the others. Just ahead. Like she was talking to something invisible that had weighed on her shoulders for a very, very long time. I've been quiet for years, she began, her voice soft, but not uncertain. I didn't speak when he stopped coming home. I didn't speak when he told the world on national television that we weren't in a marriage anymore. And just like that, every word poured in, steady, unstoppable, deliberate. I didn't speak when he made me feel like a nuisance in my own family. When I walked into rooms and suddenly felt like a ghost. He used to say that love was spiritual, that our connection mattered even if we weren't always close. But little by little, my spirit wasn't even acknowledged anymore. Kody flinched, jaw tightening, but he didn't interrupt. He knew this had been coming. He just didn't know when. I watched him build a life with Robyn and move further away from me in every way that mattered while calling it balance. Balance? Meri let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, but there was no joy in it. He once said I was loyal to a fault. That maybe if I had let go sooner, I could have been happier. Imagine hearing that from someone you still loved after decades together. Her voice cracked on that last sentence, and Christine's hand gently brushed against her thigh. A quiet gesture of solidarity. Even Janelle, strong and composed just minutes earlier, blinked back a flood of emotion as the walls between them seemed to dissolve. I didn't have the dramatic exit. I didn't pack the bags or slam a door. You all walked out and I faded. I stayed behind thinking maybe, somehow, the loyalty would mean something. But now I understand. It never did. Not to him. Robyn looked like she'd swallowed a blade. Her mouth opened slightly, but she said nothing. There was no counter for what Meri had just laid bare, no defense for the way love had been handed out in pieces. And Kody? He looked at Meri with something hard to place, guilt maybe, or realization. But it was too late for either to matter. This wasn't about saving face. This was about finally being seen. Her voice wasn't seeking validation. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She was telling the truth. I lost myself, she continued, more to herself now. Not because of marriage, but because I kept trying to earn my place back in a house that had already locked the door. The courtroom stayed completely still. Every viewer who's ever loved someone that slowly stopped seeing them was with her in that moment. And she gave voice to what so many couldn't say out loud. I deserved more than silence, more than being tolerated. Then she turned to Kody, just for a moment, and so did they. Not a scream, not a scene. Just a quiet goodbye layered inside every word. But even now, in the stillness that followed, something clicked. Because that wasn't all David had. The next recording didn't just attack the women. It exposed something about the children. And when that plays, nothing will protect him from what comes next. The room had barely settled from Meri's quiet storm when David reached into his folder again. No theatrics, no warnings. He simply looked at the judge, then Christine, and nodded once. His hands didn't shake, his eyes didn't drift. He connected the drive to the speaker again and pressed play. Kody's voice erupted, louder this time, agitated, almost snarling. They're always talking about what I didn't give them. What about what they didn't give me? Obedience, respect. I was supposed to carry this family like some kind of mule while they sat around complaining. Christine thought she was a queen. Janelle never listened. And Meri? She's lucky I didn't walk out years ago. I gave them everything, and they still treated me like I was never enough. The force in his words hit harder than anyone expected. Even the professionals in the room sat back in their seats. This wasn't frustration. This was contempt. And it was directed at the very women he once called his partners. Christine's face went pale. She didn't breathe. Janelle frowned softly, almost in disbelief. Meri didn't blink, but her hands folded tighter in her lap. Even Robyn's head sank an inch lower. Her eyes darted to the floor. She knew what was coming now. No camera edits. No private conversations. No scripted tears. This was his real voice when no one else was around. And it was ugly. He continued, angrier now, practically spitting through the speaker. The problem is, they think they deserve me, but they don't. None of them. Christine walked out thinking she was some victim. She's delusional. And Janelle loves independence more than she ever loved me. Meri's been emotionally checked out since the catfish. I've carried their baggage for 20 damn years. The courtroom felt frozen in time. You could hear the hum of fluorescent lights in the silence that followed. Kody's voice in that recording didn't just leave a bad taste, it changed something. It gave sound to the emotional bruises those women carried for years in silence. It gave proof to the cracks they once tried to patch with hope and patience. And then came the twist that pulled the floor out from beneath everyone. This recording, David said, almost gently, was made just 4 months ago. Gasps, whispers. Christine's hand shot to her mouth, her body frozen in place. 4 months ago? This wasn't old. This wasn't from a time when things were tense and unraveling. This wasn't the heat of divorce or some ancient outburst buried in anger. This was recent. This was after Christine left, after Janelle separated, after Kody told the world he was trying to grow. And yet, here he was, off record, off guard, and dripping with venom. Robyn closed her eyes briefly, like if she didn't see the room. Maybe the room wouldn't see her. But it did. Everyone did. She wasn't crying this time. She wasn't defending him either. Because deep down, even she knew, this recording crossed a line. One that words like venting could never excuse. "I don't know why they're still talking about me," Kody's voice raged on. "They've made their choices. Now they want to act like I abandoned them? Ridiculous. I gave more than any man would have. And I'm done apologizing for not loving women who don't deserve it." Christine flinched. Janelle folded her arms and stared straight ahead with trembling lips. Meri took a breath so deep it almost sounded like she'd been underwater for too long. And Kody? Sitting in that courtroom, he finally looked. Not angry, not proud, but genuinely rattled. He knew what that tape meant. Not just for his image or reputation, but for the myth he'd lived in for years. The idea that he was misunderstood. That his mistakes were noble burdens. That his decisions were always rooted in family. That fantasy? Dead. Because no one in that room would ever be able to pretend again. That voice on the tape wasn't a protector, a father, or a husband. It was someone full of bitterness, holding on to a past that had already left him. And for the first time, the family began to look at him like a stranger. But it wasn't over. Because Christine was about to say something no one expected her to say. Not to Kody, but to Robyn. And it would shake everything loose. Kody sat there, fuming. His arms crossed tighter than before, his mouth locked shut like he was trying to keep the truth from spilling out any further. But everyone had already heard it. His voice, his words, his real feelings. And now, the man who once dominated every living room he walked into couldn't even meet their eyes. It wasn't until the silence started to feel suffocating that he finally spoke. And even then, his voice came out brittle, almost uneven. "You're all twisting this," he said, forcing a half smile that didn't even touch his eyes. "That tape, it was taken out of context. You think I'm some monster, but I was venting. I was under pressure. You don't know what it's like to manage this kind of family." His words stumbled out fast, almost desperate. The power he used to have in every family meeting, every scene, every confession cam, it was gone. "You think I wanted things to fall apart?" he barked. "You think I enjoyed being abandoned?" Christine didn't respond with words. She didn't need to. She looked right at him, not with hate, not even with sadness, but with something far more cutting. She looked at him like a man she no longer recognized, like someone she had once believed in, someone she'd fought for, until she finally saw the truth, and now she couldn't unsee it. "That recording," he continued, his voice rising, "that was private. I wasn't talking to the world. I was angry at the way I've been treated. I gave Christine everything, and she ran off with him." His head snapped toward David, "like I never existed." All eyes went to David, but he remained still, calm as ever. He didn't flinch, he didn't respond. And somehow that calmness made Kody unravel faster. "You think he's here because he loves you?" Kody scoffed, his voice growing louder. "He's here because he wants to look like your savior, like he fixed what I couldn't. That's what this is all about. About making me look like the villain so he can wear the crown." "No one needs to make you look like anything," Janelle said softly across the room. "You spoke for yourself." That quiet sentence hit harder than any of Kody's shouting. Kody's shoulders dropped for a second. His outrage trying to outrun his guilt and losing. He turned toward Christine now, eyes sharp, voice shaking. "You betrayed the family by leaving. You didn't try. You gave up." "I begged you to see me," Christine said, her voice calm but full of weight. "I begged you to love me. I lowered myself over and over again just to feel like I matter to you. And nothing was ever enough unless I became someone I wasn't." Kody opened his mouth again, but no sound came. He stared at her, searching for something he could say to make her bend the way she used to. But those days were over. Everyone could see it now. David finally broke his silence, voice low and firm. The truth doesn't care about spin, Kody. You've spent years creating a version of yourself that pushed everyone else aside. Now, you're being asked to face what was always there beneath it. Kody's breath hitched. The mask cracked. His hand ran through his hair, a nervous habit that always showed up when the narrative started slipping through his hands. And now it wasn't slipping. It was gone. "You think I'm evil?" he muttered, almost dazed. "You think this is fair?" Christine didn't answer him. She looked away. Not to hurt him, but because he no longer had the power to pull a response from her. Not anymore. For once, he was the one standing alone, desperate to rewrite the story after everyone else had finally stopped reading it. But the room wasn't done shifting, because what no one expected was for Christine to finally turn, not to Kody, but to Robyn. The last conversation anyone saw coming is the one that would leave the deepest scar. No gavel landed. No one shouted. But the moment that courtroom quieted, the real noise began, the internal kind. The kind that rings in your ears when years of buried truths finally reach the surface. Sometimes silence is louder than anger, and in that instant, it was deafening. Christine didn't speak again. She didn't need to. Her body told the story for her. She sat tall, precise, as though something heavy had been peeled from her chest after years of dragging it silently behind her. She turned slowly to David, just the smallest movement, but enough. He leaned in, no words, and in that instant she tucked her head into his shoulder, arms around him, not to make a statement, just to breathe, fully, finally, without fear. Janelle watched them, a softness in her eyes, not envy, peace. Like what Christine had done didn't break the family, it showed them the way out of suffering. Her hands tightened together as her thoughts raced. Years of compromise, silence, gritting her teeth while Kody honored loyalty only when it served him. And every time she tried to keep the peace, it only earned her distance. That day, Janelle didn't say much, but in every line of her face, you could see the truth. She had found herself again, away from the noise, and this courtroom only confirmed it. She wasn't returning to anything that resembled that version of love. Meri remained seated, still, her expression unreadable now. Not because she was hiding, but because the grief had passed. What was left was a woman finally letting the weight drop. She looked at Kody across the room, but not with anger. Not even sadness. It was the look you give someone when you've let go. A strange kindness in her eyes, as if to say, "I wasted so much time on hope, and that's my burden to own." But not anymore. And then Robyn moved. She didn't look at Kody, not once as she stood. Her hands caught her face as she turned sharply from the bench and walked out. Not fast, not slow, but with the heavy steps of someone realizing she backed the wrong truth for too long. Tears ran freely, no attempt to stop them. For a long time, Robyn had believed she was the glue, the protector. But what happens when you try to hold together something that deep down was never whole? What happens when your silence becomes louder than your love? She disappeared through the back of the room. No one followed. And off to the side, quietly watching from the hallway, stood a few of the older Brown children. Grown now. No longer kids. Black hoodies, crossed arms, still faces. They didn't speak, they didn't make a scene, but they were there, listening to every word that was said, hearing the tone in their father's voice in those recordings, hearing what their mothers suffered in silence, while they grew up thinking love had to be kept behind glass. What message do kids carry home from parents who love in performances and punish in private? What happens when they realize none of it had to be that way? So here's the question, and maybe it's one we all have to sit with. If you were part of this family, sitting in that courtroom, knowing what you now know, what would you do? Would you stay loyal to the version of love you were sold, or finally walk away from the one that never saw you at all? The answers were different for each of them, but one thing was clear. The family that once stood like a single tree had now split into separate roots, and no one, especially not Kody, could put them back together again. There was no grand final speech, no music, no judge slamming a gavel, just silence. The kind that settles in after every lie has fallen, after the last excuse has collapsed under its own weight. It was the silence of acceptance. And each person inside that room had to face it alone. Christine stood outside in the hallway now, shoulders relaxed in a way we hadn't seen in years. The tension that had once lived just beneath her smile was gone. She wasn't trying to manage anyone's emotions. She wasn't scanning the room to see how Kody might react. She was free, and this time it wasn't theoretical. It was real. You could see it in the way she held David's hand. Not tightly, not possessively, just openly. That's what peace looks like when you've lived through emotional scarcity. Her chapter with Kody wasn't a breakup. It was survival, choosing to stop apologizing for existing. Janelle followed soon after, carrying her coat over her arm, eyes soft but clear. There was nothing left to say, no spite, no anger screaming to be heard. She'd spent too many years rationalizing the imbalance, holding the family together with compromise while never being held, herself. But what the courtroom reminded her, and maybe 1,000 other women watching, was that quiet endurance and self-sacrifice are not love languages. Her loyalty was real, but now it belonged to someone else, herself. Meri lingered at the back of the room long after most had gone. Her steps were slow, her eyes tracing each wall like they were full of memories she'd once tried to forget. But the woman who finally walked out of that courtroom didn't look crushed. She looked calm, unfolded, like someone who had once glued herself to pieces of a man who let her fall over and over, and finally realized she'd survived anyway, on her own terms. And what about Robyn? She was seen later, alone in the parking lot, pacing slowly beside her car. One hand clutched the door, the other pressed against her mouth like she was holding back more than words. She didn't leave with Kody. She didn't say goodbye to Christine, Janelle, or Meri. She left caught in between. The last one still trying, maybe failing, maybe simply hoping that the dream she believed in wasn't completely dead. But now, even she had to admit it always cost someone else. Kody was the last to leave. No cameras, no smile, no long walk of righteousness. Just a man aged 20 years in one afternoon, dragging the weight of a legacy destroyed by his own voice. You could see it in his eyes. The realization that when everyone finally spoke, they said the same thing he never believed. We loved you, and you made us feel invisible. That was the lie. That the family was broken by time, by ambition, by distance, but it wasn't. It broke because the love was never spread equally. And when one person dictates who gets seen, who gets heard, and who is worthy, it's not love, it's control wearing a wedding ring. In the months that followed, Christine began building something new, something bright. Photos surfaced of her laughing, dancing, holding her granddaughter with the kind of joy that doesn't come from men. It comes from relief. Janelle closed that chapter in quiet resolution. She didn't need a platform. She found home in her own stillness, reclaiming seasons of her life that she'd given up trying to be enough. Meri opened a new door to personal growth, retreats, honesty, unfiltered reflection. She had always been dismissed, but now she wasn't asking for a seat at any table. She was building her own. As for Robyn, she hasn't been seen much. The woman who once held center stage now lives in a quieter narrative. Maybe reflection, maybe regret. Time will answer that. Or maybe it won't. This wasn't the ending of a reality TV storyline. This was the end of an illusion. A truth that every woman in that family reached at different times, in different ways, but all together in one unspoken understanding. You cannot heal where you're still being hurt. So now, we ask you, if you were standing in that courtroom, after all the pain, the distortions, the emotional winters suffered in silence, how would you choose to be remembered? Let us know in the comments below, because when love becomes a performance, silence isn't strength. Speaking up is survival.